In this, let us try to understand the meaning of risk. Now, in order to define the risk, there is no particular definition that exists so far. There is no universal or comprehensive definition of risk that exists so far. Risk is traditionally has been defined as in terms of uncertainty concerning the occurrence of the loss. Uncertainty is unexpected one, the thing which we cannot expect in the future. So the next moment, what is going to happen, that is unpredictable, unexpected. Hence, that uncertainty can be termed as risk. There are some of the other definitions for the risk. Risk is the probability of an unfortunate occurrence. Now, there is a war going on between India and Pakistan, which is an unfortunate one, which is unexpected one, right? It is a risk, that is the risk which we are facing now. So that is called as risk. That is a possibility of unfortunate occurrence, which we will not expect. Risk is a combination of hazard. Hazard means it's a peril or it is a kind of a problem. So risk is a combination of hazards. Risk is unpredictable. We cannot predict the risk exactly. We can expect to some extent, but exactly we cannot predict it. The tendency that actual results may differ from the predicted one. The tendency like may differ from the predicted one means we expect that the risk will be there for a certain period of time, but actually when we see the risk may be more than what we have expected or less than what we have expected. So risk is unpredictable. Risk is uncertainty of loss. It is uncertainty of loss, that is the one the risk is loss we are going to face, which is uncertain in nature, unpredictable in nature. Risk is the probability of loss. Whenever we talk about risk, we take the term risk. It is prone to have losses than the gains. So risk is a possibility or probability of losses. So these are the various meanings which we can see for the risk. Then in risk, some of the common elements which we can see in the definitions are indeterminacy, indeterminacy, which means the outcome must be in question. When the risk is said to exist, there must be at least two possible outcomes. When the risk is said to be exist, when we are taking risk, there are two possible outcomes. It is going to happen, it is not going to happen. So two possible outcomes will be there. If we know for certain that a loss occurs, there is no risk. If we know that exactly this is the loss we are going to have, say for example, you are writing an exam. For that, you have prepared very well. If you are prepared very well, there is no risk. You are not going to get any loss, because if you are prepared well, you are going to write the exam well and you are going to score a good marks. So that is certain that because you have prepared, you could write the exam properly. Hence, there is no risk in that. But if you did not prepare well and you have written something in your exam, there are two possible outcomes, that you will fail or you may pass with the border marks. So that is a kind of risk which you are taking without preparing and writing the exam. You are taking a risk over there. So risk is unexpected one, unpredictable one, where you're going to have more than one outcome, more than one result will be there. Whereas there will be no risk if you are if you know about the certain loss, if you know about certain outcome. So that is indeterminacy. Then loss. At least one of the possible outcome is undesirable, maybe loss. Now, whatever the two possible outcomes we are saying here, out of two possible outcomes, if one possible outcome is undesirable, maybe a loss. The one which you have not expected, that is nothing but your loss. You have studied one question, but in the exam you got another question. Now, which you cannot attempt it. That means it is a loss which you have to face. That is another possible outcome. So the common elements in the risk we can see is indeterminacy, that we cannot determine exactly what it is going to happen in the risk element, and loss. If you have to face the losses when you are taking the risk. So these are the two common elements which we can take, which we can see in the definition of risk. Then we have something called risk and uncertainty. Risk versus uncertainty. Uncertainty. What is uncertainty? Doubt about your ability to predict the future outcome of current situation. Based on your current situation, you're going to predict about the future, which is uncertain in nature, arises when an individual perceives that outcome cannot be known with certainty. In the next moment, what it is going to happen, you cannot exactly define it. You cannot exactly state it, which you are not very much certain about it. That is called as uncertain. Describes a state of mind. The level and the type of information on the nature of a risky activity have an important effect on uncertainty. Say for example, you have funds with you and you have invested in one of the company by purchasing the shares. Now, when you have purchased the shares, based on your current share price, you will expect the future share price. Maybe after 3 months, how the prices will be, which you are not certain. And the price increase అవ్వచ్చు డిక్రీజ్ అవ్వచ్చు, అది మన చేతుల్లో ఉండదు. ఆ పర్టికులర్ సిచ్యువేషన్ మనం అన్సర్టనిటీ అని అంటాం. ఆ అన్సర్టనిటీని ఫేస్ చేసుకొని మన స్టేట్ ఆఫ్ మైండ్ ఎలా ఉంది అనేది వీ కెన్ ఈజీలీ ఎస్టిమేట్. That is your uncertainty, which we cannot expect anything about the future, which is unpredictable in nature, which may happen, which may not happen. Now, next is probability. Risk is the level of possibility that an action leads to a loss, undesirable outcome, but probability is a chance of loss used to measure or estimate of how likely the event will occur. There is a difference between loss and probability. Risk means you are taking the probability of action which leads to either a loss or an undesirable outcome. When you are taking risk means you are ready to take the losses also. You are ready to face the losses or undesirable outcome. Whereas probability is, it measures how much the loss we are going to face in the future. So probability tells you the chances of loss or measures the value of loss. Risk will explains you the level of loss which we are going to take in the future period, which is an undesirable mode. Probability has both objective and subjective aspects. Objective probability refers to long-run relative frequency of an event based on assumptions of an infinite number of observations and of no change in the underlying conditions. Like objective probability means in the long run, when an event is based on the assumptions of an infinite number of observations. That is objective probability. Objective probability, again we have inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. And subjective probability is the individual's personal estimate of chances of loss. When an individual is given to judge a particular chances of loss, then that is based on the subjective probability, whereas objective probability, it is based on the event that has actually happened or event that is prone to happen in the future. That is not based on the subjective decisions made by the persons, that is made on purely the proofs which we will gather after conducting a estimation. So subjective is based on the person's ability to estimate the future chances of loss. The factors include in subjective probability is person's age, gender. Females will judge a particular concept in a different way. Males will judge a particular concept in a different way, based on the age group also, based on the intelligence, based on the education, based on the use of alcohol. There are several other reasons which will influence the subjective probability. So these are probability and risk. Then we can come across with some of the terms peril and hazard. Now peril and hazard means a peril is a potential event or factor that can cause a loss. Now, this is a peril is it is a kind of event that will occur suddenly and it will lead to the loss to a particular person or to a particular property. The examples are fire accident, hails, tornadoes, earthquakes, theft, robbery, floods. All this comes under your natural hazards. We say it as it's a peril which is not in our hands, which is having a major effect on the loss that the individual or the property has to fix. Now, hazard is a condition that creates or increases the chances of loss. It is possible for something to be both peril and hazard. Sometimes, or we can say that peril or hazard both are, having the same, meaning, but that intensity will changes depending upon the type or depending upon the intensity of the loss that the person or the property is going to face. But both will have the common, meaning. When we say peril, peril is going to be common. Like earthquake, if earthquake occurs in one particular region, everyone will have the same sort of loss. Whereas hazard, if an accident occurs, the chances of loss will be more for the person who met with an accident than the persons who are nearby to that particular accident area. So like that, peril and hazard is also terms which we will come across in the risk. Then there are four types of hazards. Physical hazard, the physical condition that increases the chances of loss. If a person met with an accident, the physical loss of any of the body part leads to increase in the chances of loss, more loss. So that is a physical hazard. Moral hazard, dishonesty or character defects in individual that increases the frequency or severity of loss. Now, if any person get cheated by any of the other person, like two people are there, two friends are there, one friend has taken loan from the another friend, and he said that he will be paid in 1 year, but he did not pay and he cheated that particular person, then that comes under severity of losses, which is morally the individual's characters will defects. That particular risk we call it as moral hazard. Then morale, moral hazard, carelessness or indifference to a loss because of existence of the insurance. Now, some of the people will think that like you have mobile insurance. Recently, we can see for mobiles also we can take the insurance policies. Now, ఇప్పుడు ఇన్సూరెన్స్ పాలసీ మొబైల్కి మనం తీసుకున్నామని చెప్పి మొబైల్ని ఎలా అంటే అలా వాడాము అని అంటే దట్ ఈస్ కేర్లెస్నెస్ అని అంటాం. ఇట్స్ అ కేర్లెస్నెస్ హ్యావింగ్ నో ఎఫెక్ట్ ఆన్ ఇన్సూరెన్స్ ఉంది కదా, ఇన్సూరెన్స్ వస్తుంది, ఏం కాదు మనం వాటర్లో డిప్ చేద్దాము ఆర్ ఎలా అంటే అలా దాన్ని యూజ్ చేయడము, ఇఫ్ డ్యామేజ్ అక్కర్స్ మనకి ఇన్సూరెన్స్ వస్తుంది అన్న ఒక thought process. So if they started using the things like that comes under moral hazards. Moral hazards is basically the way we do our things in a careless manner that leads to the moral hazard. Then legal hazard, the characteristics of a legal system or a regulatory environment that increases the frequency of severity of losses. Like legal hazard, if you can see, when we travel, మనం ఎక్కడైనా బయటికి వెళ్ళినప్పుడు నో పార్కింగ్ ఏరియా దగ్గర మనం కార్ ఆర్ బైక్ పార్క్ చేసాము. ఇట్ ఈస్ very obvious that if we park our vehicle on a place where there is a no parking sign, obviously we have to face the fine on that particular activity, or red light వచ్చిన తర్వాత కూడా మనం సిగ్నల్ క్రాస్ చేసాము, obviously we have to face the legal consequences. ఆర్ హెల్మెట్ పెట్టుకొని డ్రైవ్ చేయాలి అని అంటారు, బట్ హెల్మెట్ పెట్టుకోకుండా మనం డ్రైవ్ చేసాము, we have to face the fine pay చేయాల్సి వస్తుంది. That all comes under your legal hazard, which increases the severity of the losses. These are the four major types of losses which we can see when it comes to the types of hazards. Then we can see classification of risk. We have classification of risk. The risk is divided into several categories: subjective and objective risk, pure and speculative risk, fundamental and particular risk, financial and non-financial risk, static and dynamic risk. Now let us see individually what are these risks. The first one we have is objective risk or statistical risk. Now objective risk is defined as the relative variation of actual loss from the expected loss. Actual loss ni expected loss ni మనం ఆ రెండింటి మధ్యలో ఉన్న డిఫరెన్స్ ని అబ్జర్వ్ చేసేదాన్ని ఆబ్జెక్టివ్ రిస్క్ అని అంటాం. Objective risk declines as the number of exposure increases. As the number of exposure increases, objective risk అనేది మనకి decrease అవుతూ ఉంటుంది. As the number of exposure increases, can predict the future loss experience more accurately because it can rely on the law of large numbers. It is something like when you are suppose a person has got experience in dealing with the stock market. నా స్టాక్ మార్కెట్ లో ఏ కంపెనీలో ఎంత ఇన్వెస్ట్ చేస్తే మనకి ఎంతవరకు ప్రాఫిట్ వస్తుంది, ఎప్పుడు సేల్ చేయాలి, ఎప్పుడు పర్చేస్ చేయాలి, ఇవన్నీ ఎక్స్పర్ట్స్ కి వాళ్ళకి బాగా ఐడియా ఉంటుంది, రైట్? బికాస్ దే ఆర్ మోర్ ఎక్స్పోజ్డ్ టు ద మోర్ నెంబర్ ఆఫ్ స్టాక్ ఎక్స్చేంజ్ ట్రాన్సాక్షన్స్. The higher the exposure, the lower will be the risk, is what subjective risk explains us. So that is your objective risk. Then subjective risk. Subjective risk means uncertainty based on person's mental condition or state of mind. It is something like you know that one of the company is running in losses, but still you have purchased their shares. It is very much obvious that because of your personal mental condition or state of mind, you have purchased a loss oriented company shares. You are prone to face the losses. It is very much obvious. That is called as subjective risk, which is purely based on individual person's decision making capacity. Sorry. High subjective risk often results in conservative or prudent behavior, while low subjective risk may leads in less conservative behavior. If you take decisions or if you are taking risk based on your mental condition, and if the risk is high, it is very much obvious that your behavior is very aggressive in nature or prudent behavior in nature. Whereas if your risk is very less, it is understood that you have a less conservative behavior. So that is your subjective risk. Then another type of risk is pure risk, a situation in which there are only the possibilities of loss or not loss. Pure risk is either you will face the loss or you will not face the loss, or you will have a న్యూట్రల్ లాస్. అంటే లాస్ మనకి ఎక్కువ లేకపోవడం లేదా కొంచెం ఉండడం, దాన్ని మనం ప్యూర్ రిస్క్ అని అంటాం. ద ఓన్లీ పాసిబుల్ అవుట్కమ్స్ ఆర్ అడ్వర్స్, లాస్ ఆర్ న్యూట్రల్, నో లాస్. అయితే లాస్ ఉంటుంది లేదా లాస్ ఉండదు. సో దట్ ఈస్ pure risk. Example, a premature death, industrial accidents. Industrial accidents, it is very, industrial, if any person is working in industries lo work chese workers ki, they are exposed to more type of risk because they are working on a huge machinery. Obviously, the accidents will occur in a very common basis. In that way, in some of the accidents will have no loss. అంటే ఎవరికి లాస్ అవ్వకుండా అది చిన్న యాక్సిడెంట్ తో క్లోజ్ అయిపోయి ఉండొచ్చు లేదా లాస్ అవ్వచ్చు. అక్కడ మన అంటే ప్యూర్ రిస్క్ లో వీ కెన్ ఈజీలీ ఎస్టిమేట్, ఎస్ దెర్ ఈజ్ అ పర్టికులర్ యాక్టివిటీ అక్కడ్, ఒక ఇన్సిడెంట్ జరిగింది, లాస్ ఇంత వచ్చింది. ఒక ఇన్సిడెంట్ జరిగింది కానీ లాస్ ఏం జరగలేదు అని చెప్పేదే మనకి ప్యూర్ లాస్. There are pure loss types. We have personal risk, property risk, liability risk. Personal risk అని అంటే personal risk of premature death. అంటే premature death అని అంటే బేబీస్ చాలా ఎర్లీ ఏజ్ లో పుట్టడం వల్ల వాళ్ళు చనిపోవడం అనేది జరుగుతుంది. దట్ ఈస్ వెరీ మచ్ కామన్. దిట్ ఈస్ రిస్క్ ఆఫ్ ప్రీమెచ్యూర్ డెత్. రిస్క్ ఆఫ్ ఇన్సఫిషియంట్ ఇన్కమ్ డ్యూరింగ్ రిటైర్మెంట్. రిటైర్మెంట్ పీరియడ్ లో మనకి ఎక్కువ ఇన్సఫిషియంట్ ఇన్కమ్ లేకపోవడం, దట్ ఈస్ అనదర్ టైప్ ఆఫ్ పర్సనల్ రిస్క్. Risk of poor health. The person is having poor health. His health condition is not good. He is having some health issues, health diseases. He is prone to have a risk of personal risk. Then risk of unemployment. If the person is not employed in any of the organization, he is prone to have the personal risk that he has to face. So these are the types of personal risk. Then we have a property risk, direct loss, indirect loss. Direct loss means any physical damage or destruction or theft of a property leads to the direct loss. Indirect loss may be because of indirectly from the occurrence of a direct physical damage. Any financial loss that occurs due to the direct physical damage that leads to the indirect loss. Basically, it is not for the human being, it is for the properties which will affect the human personal loss. Then liability loss, legal liable if you do something that results in bodily injury or property damage to someone else. If you have done something to someone else, then it leads to the legal liability. Suppose a doctor has given a wrong medicine to the patient and patient is facing some sort of physical damage that comes under your liability risk because someone else has done that property damage or bodily injury that leads to the liability risk. Through a court order only the liability risk will be faced, like you can see here in this particular situation. Then we have a speculative risk. Now, speculative risk means a situation in which either profit or loss is possible. Being on horse race, card games, investing in real estate and going into the business by yourself. Now, it is speculative risk. It is based on the speculations, based on the rumors or based on the gossips. Either you will get a profit or you will get a loss. Mostly we can see in the betting of the cricket matches in IPL. We can see one of the cricket match, one of the player is playing a really good game. Then most of the people will try to spend bet on that particular team. So likewise, it is based on the speculation. It is based on the the indefinite information that is provided by some of the concerns. So that is a speculative risk, which is based on the betting of horse races, card games, we can see. Then you have fundamental risk. Fundamental risk, the risk that affects the entire economy or a large number of persons or group within the economy. A fundamental risk which is very much common to that particular country or that particular economy. Like we can see if the IT industry is in recession. Hence, we can understand that the entire industry is in recession. It is a risk which, the fundamental risk which all the people who are working in the IT industry has to face common. So that is called as fundamental risk. The basic, examples of fundamental risk is during the war, like now we can see, or unemployment situation, or tornadoes, earthquakes, floods, or any type of fire accidents occur in that particular, area that leads to the fundamental risk. Then another type of risk we have particular risk. A risk that affects only individuals and not the entire community. Particularly one individual or a group of individuals will face this risk. We call it as particular risk. That is car theft. Car owner has to face the loss because of the car theft. Or gold theft. The gold owner has to face the loss because of the gold theft. So that is a particular risk which is associated to either individual or a group of individuals. Then we have financial risk. Now financial risk here we mean stock market risk, credit risk, interest rate risk or liquidity risk. Then non-financial risk we have implementation, operational and reputational risk. Now financial risk అంటే ఏదైనా సరే మనకి ఫైనాన్షియల్ గా ఎఫెక్ట్ అవుతుంది అని అంటే that comes under your financial risk. Then we have static risk and dynamic risk. Static risk is loss arises from cause other than the change in the economy, occur with a degree of regularity over time and generally predictable. Static risk, it is going to be static, fixed one. అంటే మనం expect చేయొచ్చు. If this kind of changes occurs in the economy, this is the risk we are going to face over a period of time. So that kind of risk we can easily estimate. We can expect it. Static, which is predictable in nature. To some extent, we can predict it, which is going to be the static one, unchangeable one. Whereas dynamic is a flexible thing. It changes from time to time. resulting from changes in the economy. Economy lo manaki ఏదైనా చిన్న చేంజ్ జరిగింది అంటే obviously we have prone to have the dynamic risk because ఎప్పుడైతే చేంజెస్ తో ఎకానమీలో చేంజ్ అవుతుందో ఆటోమేటిక్ గా మనకి డైనమిక్ రిస్క్ మనం ఫేస్ చేస్తాం. Like we have changes in the price levels, income, output, technology may lead to the financial loss, which is less predictable. And compared to static kana, dynamic risk మనం predict చేయలేము చేసిన to some extent and less predictable in nature, not the one which is having a static predictability. So this is static and dynamic risk. So these are the types of risk. Risk related to business activities. Only pure business activities ki relate ayye risk ni manam business risk ani antam. Financial risk, interest rate risk, purchasing power risk, and market risk. These are the various risks that is associated with the business risk. That is to deal with the entire risk concept, the meaning of risk, types of risk, peril, hazard, and other types of hazards and risk classification. I hope the concept is clear to you all. Now, in the same block, block one, we have another concept called risk management. Now, we understood what is the risk and what are the types of risk. Now, there should be some aspect to manage this risk. So, that comes under your management risk or risk management. A systematic process for the identification and evaluation of pure loss exposures faced by an organization or individual. What is risk management? It is identifying the risk or the loss and evaluating the loss faced by either organization or an individual. It is nothing but your risk management. And for the selection and administration of most appropriate technique for treating such exposure. ఫస్ట్ మనం రిస్క్ ని ఐడెంటిఫై చేయాలి, దాన్ని తర్వాత దాన్ని మనం ఇవాల్యుయేట్ చేయాలి. అంటే ఎంత లాస్ వచ్చింది ఈ రిస్క్ ఫేస్ చేయడం వల్ల. ఒక ఆర్గనైజేషన్ అయినా ఇండివిజువల్స్ అయినా ఎవరికైనా సరే వీ హ్యావ్ టు ఇవాల్యుయేట్ ద లాస్. నో లాస్ ఇవాల్యుయేట్ చేసిన తర్వాత వీ నీడ్ టు సెలెక్ట్ అ పర్టికులర్ టెక్నిక్ విచ్ ట్రీట్ సచ్ లాసెస్. ఇట్లాంటి లాసెస్ ని మనం ఫ్యూచర్ లో ఫేస్ చేయకుండా ఉండాలి అని అంటే ఏ టెక్నిక్ ని ఏ టూల్ ని మనం ఇన్కార్పొరేట్ చేసుకోవాలి అని చెప్పేది రిస్క్ మేనేజ్మెంట్. Such that negative outcomes are minimized. Negative outcomes are the deficits or we can say the loss can be minimized and positive outcomes are capitalized upon. Positive outcomes are manaki profits or loss lekunda undedani manam positive outcome anantam. That will be capitalized. Capitalized means increase. Positive results ni increase chestu, negative results ni decrease chestu vellede risk management. Then objectives of risk management. Now, why we need risk management? What is the aim of risk management? We have two objectives of risk management. Pre-loss objective and loss before objectives untai, post-loss objectives, after loss objective. Now, pre-loss objective. What are the pre-loss objective? Pre-loss, that is before a loss occurs. Loss occur avadanikana before objectives ఏంటంటే ఎకానమీ, దట్ ఈస్ కాస్ట్ ఆఫ్ సేఫ్టీ ప్రోగ్రామ్స్. ఒక లాస్ మనం వస్తుంది అని ఎక్స్పెక్ట్ చేసిన బిఫోర్ మనం ఏమేమి తీసుకోవాలి అని అంటే కాస్ట్ ఆఫ్ సేఫ్టీ ప్రోగ్రామ్స్, ఇన్సూరెన్స్ ప్రీమియం పెయిడ్ అండ్ కాస్ట్ అసోసియేటెడ్ విత్ డిఫరెంట్ టెక్నిక్స్ ఫర్ హ్యాండ్లింగ్ లాసెస్. ఏదైతే లాస్ మనం ఫేస్ చేస్తున్నామో ఇన్ ఫ్యూచర్ లో దానికోసం మనం ముందే సేఫ్టీ ప్రోగ్రామ్స్ ని ఇంక్లూడ్ చేసుకోవాలి. ఇన్సూరెన్స్ ప్రీమియం ఎంత పే చేసామో అదొకసారి చెక్ చేసుకోవాలి. తర్వాత టెక్నిక్స్ ఏవైతే ఉన్నాయో లాస్ ని హ్యాండిల్ చేయడానికి ఆల్ దిస్ వీ నీడ్ టు అండర్స్టాండ్. దట్ ఈస్ ఎకానమీ వైజ్, దట్ ఈస్ ఫినాన్షియల్ వైజ్ వీఆర్ థింకింగ్. దెన్ రిడక్షన్ ఆఫ్ యాంగ్జైటీ. రిడక్షన్ ఆఫ్ యాంగ్జైటీ మీన్స్ వీ నీడ్ టు రెడ్యూస్ అవర్ క్యూరియస్నెస్, భయం, ఇట్లాంటివన్నిటిని మనం తగ్గించుకోవాలి. మీటింగ్ లీగల్ obligations. To install safety devices to protect workers from harm, to dispose of harmful waste material properly and to label customer produce appropriately. Now basically meeting the legal obligations, like we need to go according to the constitution of that particular country according to the legal obligations of that particular country. Whenever we are adopting anything, we need to go according to the constitutional amendments, according to the legal obligations that the particular country is possessing. Like in the present scenario, if you can see India and Pakistan war, first pre-loss occur. We understood that we are going with the war. So before only the government, what they have done, they have taken some of the safety programs. They have given alarm signs to the people who are residing in the coastal areas of border areas, and they have included some of the safety programs like mock drills they have conducted, and they are also associated. They are also thinking with the techniques of handling the losses. The reduction of anxiety, that people should not worry, should not get fear of whatever the situation that is going on currently. Then meeting with the legal obligations. According to the legal obligations only, the country should deal with the war situation in the present thing. That is pre-loss objectives. Then post-loss objective. After the loss occurs, survival is most important, whether we are surviving or not. Survival. Continued operation. We need to continue with the operation. We need to continue with the operation. Stability of earnings. Whatever the earnings that are there, we need to have a stability over it. Continued growth and social responsibility. We need to think about the welfare of the society. Along with that, there should be continued growth in whatever the economy is facing currently. These are the post-loss objectives of risk management. Now let us see steps in risk management process. You can see the flow chart here. The step one is identify the potential losses. First, we need to identify what are the losses which we are going to face if we are going to have a risk which we are going to undertake. రిస్క్ తీసుకుంటున్నాము అని అంటే ఫస్ట్ మనం రిస్క్ తీసుకోవడం వల్ల మనకి ఏ లాసెస్ వస్తాయి అనేది మనం ఫస్ట్ ఐడెంటిఫై చేసుకోవాలి. తర్వాత ఇవాల్యుయేట్ ద లాస్. ఇవాల్యుయేట్ ద లాస్ మీన్స్ ఇన్ ఫస్ట్ స్టెప్ ఇట్ ఈస్ కాల్డ్ యాజ్ రిస్క్ ఐడెంటిఫికేషన్. వీఆర్ ఐడెంటిఫైయింగ్ ద రిస్క్. Then we are measuring the risk. Evaluate the potential losses అని అంటే ఎంత రిస్క్ వస్తుంది మనకి, ఎంత పర్సెంటేజ్ ఆఫ్ రిస్క్ మనం ఫేస్ చేయబోతున్నాము. దట్ ఈస్ యువర్ ఎవాల్యుయేషన్ ఆఫ్ రిస్క్. Then third step is select the appropriate technique. We need to select the appropriate technique of dealing with this risk. That these are the various techniques that are available. Risk control, avoidance, prevention, reduction, retention, non-insurance of transfer, commercial insurance. This all comes under techniques of risk management, which we are loss exposure, which we will deal with later. The last one is implement and administer the program. ఈ టెక్నిక్స్ లో ఏ టెక్నిక్ మనకి బెస్ట్ సూటబుల్ ఉందో ఆ రిస్క్ సిచ్యువేషన్ లో ఆ పర్టికులర్ టూల్ ని మనం ఇంప్లిమెంట్ చేసి we have to administer the particular program. These are the steps that are involved in the risk management process. Now step 1, identifying the potential losses, that is risk identification. Identify all major and minor loss exposure. మనం ఎంత లాస్ ఫేస్ చేస్తామో అనేది అది చిన్నదైనా పెద్దదైనా మేజర్ ఆర్ మైనర్, we need to identify it first. A loss exposure is any situation where a loss is possible. మనకి ఇక్కడ లాస్ ఎక్స్పోజర్ అని అంటున్నాం కదా. లాస్ ఎక్స్పోజర్ అని అంటే ఏదైనా సిచ్యువేషన్ లో మనం ఒక లాస్ ఫేస్ చేస్తున్నాము అని అంటే దాన్ని మనం లాస్ ఎక్స్పోజర్ అని అంటాం. వెదర్ లాస్ అకర్స్ ఆర్ నాట్. లాస్ వస్తుంది రాదు అది సెకండరీ, బట్ లాస్ వస్తుందేమో అని చెప్పి మనం ఎక్స్పెక్టేషన్ ఏదైతే చేస్తామో దాన్ని లాస్ ఎక్స్పోజర్ అని అంటాం. లాస్ ఎక్స్పోజర్ టిపికల్లీ క్లాసిఫైడ్ యాజ్ సోర్సెస్ ఆఫ్ రిస్క్. అంటే లాస్ ఎక్స్పోజర్ ని మనం బేస్డ్ ఆన్ ద సోర్సెస్ ఆఫ్ రిస్క్, ఒక్కొక్క టైప్ ఆఫ్ రిస్క్ కి ఒక్కొక్క టైప్ ఆఫ్ లాస్ అనేది మనకి ఉంటుంది. సో ఆ లాస్ ఎక్స్పోజర్ ని మనం ఫేస్ చేస్తాం. The sources of possible losses are recognized. ఏ సోర్స్ నుంచి మనకి ఎంత లాస్ వస్తుంది అనేది that we have to recognize. This we will do it in the step 1, that is identification of potential losses. Then loss exposure. ఎక్కడెక్కడ నుంచి మనకి లాస్ వస్తుంది, ఏ టైప్ what type of loss exposures we will face. One is property loss exposure. Property loss exposure, like you can see here, any vehicle met with an accident, that's a property loss exposure, or we can say building has collapsed due to the earthquake, that is a property loss exposure. Business income loss exposure, the business is running in losses, it's a business income loss exposure. Human resource loss exposure, unemployment situation, or the people are not, available to work in a particular, conditions. Human resource loss exposure. Crime loss exposure, the crime rate is very high in particular, field, particular area. Employee benefit loss exposure, employees are not getting the salaries properly, or they are not getting any benefits like PF, all that leads to the employee benefit loss exposure. Foreign loss exposure, we are getting loss exposure from the foreign countries. Liability loss exposure, because of the third party, we are facing the losses, the liability loss exposure. These are the various loss exposures which we can see. Employee benefit loss exposure, failure to comply with the government regulations, failure to pay the promised benefits. As I told you, the government regulations ప్రకారం వాళ్ళకి సాలరీస్ ఇవ్వకపోవడం, లేదా the government regulations ని వాళ్ళు ప్రాపర్ గా ఫాలో అవ్వకపోవడం. Whatever they have promised to pay the benefits to the employee, they are not able to pay that. Unable to provide the group life or health and retirement plan insurance policies to the employees, that leads to the employee benefit loss exposure. Then foreign loss exposure, acts of terrorism. Presently, we could see in India, because of the terror attacks, we are, citizens have lost some of their lives. So, act of terrorism, plans, business property, inventory loss, foreign currency risk, kidnapping of key persons, political risk comes under your foreign loss exposure. Liability risk, defective products, because the medicine is the medicine which they have provided is of expired one, or the medicine is not of appropriate one, which leads to the liability risk. Sexual harassment of the employees, discrimination against employees, wrongful termination, misuse of internet and email transactions, all this comes under your liability risk. Because of third party, the person or a group of persons are facing some sort of risk, that leads to the liability risk. Now, there are techniques for identifying the risks. The techniques includes loss exposure checklist. You need to have a checklist. You need to have a point stating that what are the various loss exposures are, identified. Then risk analysis questionnaires. Then financial statement method is another method. Flowchart method, contract analysis, physical inspection, interaction with other departments, interaction with outside suppliers and professional organizations, statistical records of losses, historical loss data. All these are the various techniques for identifying the risk. Loss exposure checklist. Now this one individually we are seeing. First one, loss exposure checklist. In that we will see specific numerous potential sources of loss from destruction of assets and from legal liability. Any destruction of assets that takes place, the loss, potential sources of loss that we have to consider. Some are designed for specific industries, such as manufacturers, retail stores, educational institutions, or religious organizations. The other focus on specific category of exposure, such as real and personal property. Then step 2 is risk measurement, risk evaluation. We need to measure the risk. To evaluate and measure the impact of losses on the firm, this step involves the estimation of potential frequency and severity of loss. As you can see here, a matrix is given, risk matrix is given. Here you will see the levels, level A to E, and likelihood, consequences 1 to 5. Consequences is insignificant, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic. And highly risk oriented, less risk oriented, minor, that is moderate one, major, high, it is very high. Expected to occur, likely to occur, possible, unlikely to occur, very likely to occur. So suppose if you see this particular block, that is C3, which is having a moderate, that is possible to occur and the consequence is moderate. అంటే రిస్క్ పాసిబుల్ గా రిస్క్ ఫేస్ చేస్తున్నాము కానీ a normal risk మనం ఫేస్ చేస్తున్నాం కాబట్టి the outcome is normal. Suppose if you see here very high, that is expected to occur. And it is understood, it is known that we are going to face a huge risk and the consequence is also very high. So like that we measured the risk. And a type of risk తీసుకోవడం వల్ల ఎంత consequences, ఎంత loss మనం face చేస్తున్నాము. Higher the risk, higher will be the consequence, higher will be the loss. Lower the risk, lower will be the loss. Then risk measurement, that is risk evaluation. We try to evaluate the risk. This is important so that various loss exposures can be ranked according to their relative importance. As I told you here, ranking అనేది ఇవ్వడం జరిగింది. హై రిస్క్ ఎప్పుడు వస్తుంది అని అంటే హైగా మనం హై కాన్సిక్వెన్సెస్ మనం ఎప్పుడు ఫేస్ చేస్తాము అని అంటే హై రిస్క్ మనం ఫేస్ చేస్తాము. సో లైక్ దట్ relative frequency and severity of each loss exposure must be estimated. ఎంత రిస్క్ మనం ఫేస్ చేస్తున్నాము, ఎంత లాస్ మనం ఎక్స్పోజర్ అయ్యాము అనే టెక్నిక్స్ ని బట్టి మనం వీ కెన్ ఈజీలీ ఎస్టిమేట్ ఇవాల్యుయేట్ ద రిస్క్. Guidelines for measuring the severity. Now if like you can see in this picture, if the fire accident occurs, we need to measure what is the possibility of the loss. So it is worst case scenario and the most pessimistic view. Worst case scenario and the maximum possible loss which will occur is the worst loss that is likely to happen. Inversely proportional to the size of the structure and effectiveness of any protective safeguards. Inversely, like maximum possible situations, maximum worst situations lo maximum loss మనం face చేస్తాము. దానికి opposite లో inversely the effectiveness of any protective safeguards if we are taken. మనం ఏమైనా safeguard measures తీసుకున్నాము అంటే loss మనం reduce చేయొచ్చు. Safeguard measures ఏం తీసుకోలేదు అని అంటే we have to face the worst case scenario where we are going to have the maximum possible or the probable loss. Then select the appropriate technique for treating the loss exposure, that is your risk control. Now we are going to see these techniques or treating the loss exposure. First one is risk control. Risk control, you have risk avoidance, loss control. Second one is your risk financing techniques, risk retention, insurance, non-insurance transfer. First we will see risk control. Risk avoidance. Avoidance means certain loss exposure is never acquired or an existing loss exposure is abandoned. Now we avoid such type of risk. If you conscious decision not to expose oneself or one's firm to a particular risk of loss, the decrease one's chances of loss to zero. Risk avoidance is అక్కడ risk ఉంటుందని తెలిసి we try to avoid going to that particular situation or we abandon that particular situation. If you do anything wrongful act, you have to face the losses is what we know. So hence we avoid that particular situation that comes under your risk avoidance. Then risk control, you have loss control. When losses cannot be avoided, there are few situations you cannot avoid such loss. Then in that case, you control your loss. You decrease your loss so that because you avoid cheyaleni situation, you have to reduce your loss. Involves making conscious decisions regarding the way whose activities will be conducted. When you are taking any decisions in case of taking up the risk, first thing is you avoid it. If you cannot avoid it and if you have to face the risk, then you try to make a decision like that or you involve into such activities so that your loss will be reduced. So that is your risk control. First thing is avoid it. Second one, if you cannot avoid, at least control your loss. Then two methods of classifying loss control involves focus and timing. Now how to control your loss is focus as well as timing. Focus on loss control. Designed primarily to reduce the loss frequency, referred to as frequency reduction or loss prevention. For example, measures that reduce truck accidents includes driver examination. Now, truck driver కన్సైన్మెంట్ ని ఒక ఏరియా నుంచి ఇంకో ఏరియాకి పంపిస్తున్నారు అని అన్నప్పుడు యాక్సిడెంట్స్ ని తగ్గించాలి అని అంటే ఫస్ట్ డ్రైవర్ ని ఎగ్జామిన్ చేయాలి. హిస్ హెల్త్ కండిషన్ మస్ట్ బి ఎగ్జామిన్ whether he has taken any alcohol or any kind of drugs that must be taken prior carefulness. Then installation of safety features, placement of warning labels on dangerous products like that. All this includes on focus on loss control. Then timing of loss control is loss prevention and loss reduction. Concurrent activities, post-loss activities. Pre-loss activities, concurrent activities, post-loss activities. Pre-loss activities వచ్చేసరికి మనకి loss controlling technique లో వచ్చేస్తుంది. Concurrent activities, the activities that takes place concurrently with the losses. Post-loss activities always have a severity reduction focus. Potential benefits of loss control. Loss control చేయడం వల్ల మనకి advantages ఏంటి అని అంటే repair or replacement of damaged product we can go with. Either we can eliminate it or we will reduce it. Damaged product అవ్వడానికి మనం reduce చేయొచ్చు or we can eliminate it. Then income losses due to destruction of the property we can reduce. Extra cost to maintain operation following the loss we can reduce. Adverse liability of judgments we can reduce. Medical cost to threat insurance. Income losses due to death or disability can be reduced with the help of loss. Then the third one we have is risk control. We have seen risk avoidance, loss control. Now let us see risk retention. Risk retention means the firm retains part or all activities exposed to a loss. Retention is retention. The meaning is holding back or holding it tightly. Risk retention means ఏదైతే లాస్ మనకి ఎక్స్పోజ్ ఉన్న యాక్టివిటీస్ ఉన్నాయో లాస్ ఎక్స్పోజ్ అయ్యే యాక్టివిటీస్ ఉన్నాయో అది అయితే మొత్తాన్ని మనం ఆపేస్తాము లేదా కొంతవరకు ఏదైతే ఎక్కువ లాస్ ఇచ్చే యాక్టివిటీస్ ఉన్నాయో దాన్ని కొంతమన్నా ఐదర్ పార్ట్ ఆర్ హోల్లీ వీ కెన్ కంట్రోల్ ఇట్. Can be effectively used in risk management program under the following conditions. Risk retention మనం ఎప్పుడు యూజ్ చేస్తాము అంటే నో అదర్ మెథడ్ ఆఫ్ ట్రీట్మెంట్ ఈజ్ అవైలబుల్. రిస్క్ రిటెన్షన్ ఎప్పుడు యూజ్ చేస్తామంటే ఇక వేరే ఏ మెథడ్ మనకి అవైలబుల్ గా లేదు అంటే రిస్క్ అవాయిడెన్స్ రిస్క్ కంట్రోల్ అవైలబుల్ గా లేదు అని అన్నప్పుడు ఇంకా అది సూటబుల్ కాదు అని అన్నప్పుడు వి గో విత్ ద రిస్క్ రిటెన్షన్, వి హోల్డ్ ద రిస్క్. ద వర్స్ట్ పాసిబుల్ లాస్ ఈజ్ నాట్ serious. If the worst situation is not so serious, we retain the risk. Losses are highly predictable. When we know that the losses are very much high, we retain the risk. ఇంకా రిస్క్ చాలా హై రిస్క్ ఉంది అని అన్నప్పుడు మనం ఆ రిస్క్ తీసుకోము, రిస్క్ ని ఆపేస్తాము. సో దట్ ఈస్ లాస్ ఆర్ హైలీ ప్రిడిక్టబుల్. Then risk retention, the following methods are typically used for paying the losses: current net income, unfunded reserve, funded reserve, credit side. Then advantages of risk retention. Risk ni retain చేయడం వల్ల మనకు advantages ఏంటి అంటే saves money. Obviously we are not going with the risk, we are retaining, holding the risk. Money save అవుతాయి, lower expenses, మన ఖర్చులు తగ్గుతాయి, encourages the loss prevention. Loss ఏదైతే ఉంటుందో అది ప్రివెంట్ చేస్తాం మనము. Increases cash flow, మన cash flow ఏదైతే ఉంటుందో అది increase అవుతుంది. These are the advantages of risk retention. Next, risk financing techniques. Disadvantages of risk retention is possible high losses. There are possibility of higher losses, higher expenses and higher taxes with the risk retention policy. Risk retention technique. Then another technique is risk transfer insurance, a contractual transfer of risk. Here, insurance, the risk will be transferred from one party to the another party. 5 key areas must be emphasized. They are the following: selection of insurance coverage. What type of insurance policy we are selecting, that is based on whether we can transfer the risk or not. Selection of an insurer. ఏ కంపెనీని మనం సెలెక్ట్ చేసుకుంటున్నాం దాని బేస్ పైన కూడా మనకి రిస్క్ ట్రాన్స్ఫర్ అవైలబుల్ ఉందా లేదా అనేది we can estimate. Negotiations of the terms. The negotiations which included in the terms like premium payments కానీ లేదా కాంపెన్సేషన్ పేమెంట్స్ కానీ the term of insurance కానీ all this the terms పైన మనం negotiate చేయొచ్చు. Dissemination of information concerning insurance coverage. To whom we have to disclose the information. Information మనం ఎవరికి చెప్పాల్సి ఉంటుంది, ఎవరికి చెప్పాల్సిన అవసరం లేదు. That also depends on risk. Periodic review of the insurance program. Insurance policy తీసుకున్న తర్వాత మనం periodic review అనేది చేసుకోవాలి. 1 year, 2 years అట్లా periodic review of the insurance program for the insurance transfer. Non-insurance transfer. Insurance cannot be transferred at some situation. The transfer of activity or the property. Property nana transfer cheyali leda activity nana transfer cheyali. Transfer of the probable loss and hedging. Probable loss ni manam transfer cheyali leda hedging cheyali. And the last step is implementation and administer the program. Finally, once we have decided with the technique, మనం risk retention వెళ్తున్నామా, risk avoidance వెళ్తున్నామా, loss control వెళ్తున్నామా, అయితే ఏ టెక్నిక్ అయితే ఉందో అది మనం ఇంప్లిమెంట్ చేసి తర్వాత రిజల్ట్ మనం అడ్మినిస్ట్రేట్ చేయాలి. రిజల్ట్ మనం అనలైజ్ చేసుకోవాల్సి ఉంటుంది త్రూ రిస్క్ మేనేజ్మెంట్ పాలసీ స్టేట్మెంట్, రిస్క్ మేనేజ్మెంట్ మాన్యువల్, cooperative with other department, periodic review and evaluation. So all these we have to administer by implementing the risk management. Right, this is the introduction of your risk, types of risk, sources of risk, loss exposure, and risk management meaning, risk management techniques, and steps which are included in the risk management, and techniques we have to implement at the time of losses which we are going to implement. So these are the concepts which we have in the block 1, chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter. I hope the concept is very much clear to you all. In the next class, I will continue with. Have a nice day. Thank you.